Well, hi everybody, and welcome to the start of another series for the LGAQ Lunch and Learn series. I just want to check for sound because sometimes this becomes an issue. And I'll just perhaps familiarize you with some of the features here. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll notice there's a little box that says questions. Could I ask you just to simply write in the word or type in the word clear if I'm coming across as clear. Now obviously if you can't hear me then you're not going to be able to write anything, but I just want to check to see that I'm okay. Thanks, Michelle. So just keep those coming because this broadcast's going all throughout Queensland, and so internet connections are different in different places. So thanks, Jane. It sounds like that's coming across clear. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Good. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Okay, thanks, Renee. Yeah, sounds like it's coming across well, which is great. So again, warm welcome, and this is the way it works, that if you've got a question or comment, or you want me to clarify something, at any time during the next hour, just go to that little box on the right-hand side and just type in your question. Now, I'll keep an eye on that. So the whole idea is that during the presentation, I'll stop and address those questions, comments, or clarifications. That way we keep it as interactive as we can. You can probably appreciate we can't allow the everyone to speak because people will speak at different times. So this is our best way of keeping this very interactive. I'll turn off the webcam shortly because it gets a bit distracting and I can't completely see my screen, but I just wanted you to know there was a human being here behind this webinar, and obviously I'll be working with you on the 6 one-hour sessions that we've got over the coming weeks. So warm welcome. I'm looking forward to working with you. The last session we got really fantastic feedback, so let's get underway. I'll just close down the webcam and move on to the first slide. Now, the first thing I want to say about the slides is this. You will receive a copy of the slides at the end of this presentation. In fact, probably an hour to 2 hours maximum after this presentation. You will also receive a video of this, so you'll get the slides plus the audio, and it's your choice, of course, which you download for your own purposes. So rest assured you'll get all this information. You don't need to take copious notes. If you're having a late lunch, enjoy your late lunch and just focus on what we're doing here. So that will happen, and I just want to give you a quick overview as to what the program looks like. Now, I did send emails to people, and I just want to say this to you, that when I send out a blanket email to lots of people, particularly if there's several people from the same council, it may well be that the firewalls of that council reject the emails, and it goes into your it goes into the spam filter, if you like. So rest assured I've got your email details because I wouldn't be talking to you now if I didn't. So I just simply will send this out later. But if there's an issue there, just send me an email. And by the way, speaking of emails, at any time you can send me emails. Basically feedback on the program, what you've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Go ahead and do that at any time. You're most welcome to do that. In fact, that's part of what the process is about. So you can see today we're going to look at the ingredients of effective feedback, and you might say, well, why have I got this order in here? No particular reason, but I think that these 6 topics, if you like, are critically important to anyone in a leadership role. So that's essentially why we have these 6. I mean, there are probably many, many others that I could include. We've started an executive program which will have a different focus on strategic direction and management, but essentially we'll look at feedback today. You'll get homework after each session, and the whole purpose of that is for you to try something. When I say homework, it's really very practical. In other words, you just got to go ahead and try something out in the workplace or complete a diagnostic or whatever it might be. But Module 2, and I've got the dates here as well, and I really strongly recommend you put these into your diary, because what happens is busyness gets in the way, and of course we forget to tune in, and it's a good idea to get into that discipline of tuning in. Of course, you'll be getting the slides and the recording, and it's very tempting just to say, well, I won't worry about that, and I'll just receive the slides and recording. But it's probably better to tune in and get into that discipline of saying that this is what I'm doing in the program. So you've got the dates and the times there. So in Module 2, you'll be required to do a diagnostic, which will produce a very detailed report for you on your influencing strategies, your preferred influencing strategies. And the whole purpose of that is so that when I get together with you during the next, or Unit 2, which as you can see is the 28th of July, I will be debriefing you on that diagnostic. So it's really important to get stuck into that. You'll get that fairly quickly. If you don't get it this afternoon, you'll certainly get it early next week. In Unit 3, we will look at optimizing team performance, and making the assumption, which may not be completely correct, but the likelihood is that you're leading a team of people, and your job, amongst other things, is to get the very best out of all of those people. So I'm going to talk about some strategies and some tools about how to actually get the best out of other people in your team. And in fact, Module 4 continues that theme somewhat, because we'll talk about motivation and we'll talk about engagement and how to get the very best from the people that you lead. Then in Unit 5, we'll talk about understanding people and their personalities. And once again, there's a diagnostic, but this time it'll be a paper and pencil diagnostic I'll send you. And this will be a fun program to just look at the way people like to operate. And it's pretty much based on the platinum rule, not the golden rule. The golden rule simply says treat people how you want to be treated, but the platinum rule says treat people how they want to be treated, and you get better results, of course. So that's Module 5 or Unit 5, and then of course at the end we look at meetings. And why meetings? Well, we spend our lives in meetings, don't we? You could argue that this is a meeting. As soon as you finish here, you're probably off to another meeting and then another. So life is one long meeting. And if you are in a leadership role, I would suggest to you that it's a very good idea to learn how to be effective at facilitating meetings. Why? Because that'll be a large chunk of your responsibility if it's not already. So getting good at that is really important. Very few people are good at it, and getting good at it will set you apart from the others, and people will actually enjoy coming to your meetings, which is critically important. So those are the 6 units that we're covering, and I'll probably just finish up today talking a little bit about what's next. So moving right along, just pausing here while this comes up on your screen, and here it comes, there it is. I want to share with you, to start with, some interesting research about feedback, because feedback is a very interesting topic. We talk a lot about it, but unfortunately most people will say to you, or me, or anyone, that they don't get enough feedback, both positive and negative, from their leader. So I'm going to encourage you to be doing more of this as a result of what we're going to be covering today. What you can see at the top line there is, this is some research done with employees. And the first line shows you that if people only receive strength-based feedback, in other words, it's only positive, it's only affirming, it's only encouraging, that's the feedback they receive, then their level of engagement is very high. So look, the worst case scenario is if you found 3 positive things going right, say this afternoon or say Monday, if you're in on Monday and you gave that feedback, you will actually engage people. But this is where it gets interesting. If you look at the second bar, it shows that people who only receive critical feedback, that is negative feedback, still have a reasonable level of engagement. So in other words, giving negative feedback is actually engaging in the sense that the other person is aware of where they stand in relation to your expectations. But what's really surprising is if you decide not to give any feedback, but either positive or negative, you will effectively disengage people. So in other words, if you want to disengage people, don't give any feedback. If you want to engage people to a certain extent, then give give positive feedback. And if you want to engage people, give both positive and negative feedback. So this is very important and you may be thinking to yourself, well, I know somebody in my team, in my local government organisation that really doesn't like feedback. And I know that if I give it to them that they'll get quite upset, they might burst into tears, they might run out of the room, they might do whatever. But here's the interesting insight. People need feedback. It doesn't necessarily mean that they like feedback. So your job is to give people what they need, which is a clarity around your expectations of what they're doing in the workplace, and to do it consistently and persistently. And by doing that, you will engage people to a greater level than perhaps may otherwise be the case. So that's the first important point I want to get through to everybody. So this module is really about encouraging you to be giving more feedback to people. Okay, moving right along. Let me share with you a couple of other interesting statistics. In fact, when I say interesting, they're actually quite sobering when you consider them. Roughly 3 to 1, by a 3 to 1 margin, employees believe that constructive feedback does more to improve their performance than positive feedback. So I guess the point out of all of that is that we need to balance positive and negative feedback. Now let me preempt what your homework is going to be out of today. Your homework is going to be to give 3 pieces of feedback every day for the next week. Now you might say, well, I wish there were 3 things going right during every day for the next week. I want you to look for those things, and I want you then to give the feedback on those things and just report back and let me know what happens. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised, unless you're one of those people that do it regularly, in which case it won't be a surprise, but it might be just a wake-up call to continue to do this. So it's not an onerous task. 3 bits of feedback every single day for a week. Here's some more interesting insights. The secret to having employees listen to your feedback is whether or not they respect you. Now, this is interesting because if people don't respect you, then it doesn't matter how skillful your feedback is, it's probably going to fall on deaf ears. So it is important to be well regarded and well respected by the people that work for you. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's a bit like a dog chasing its tail. You need to actually be giving people feedback in order to be respected. So you've kind of got to do it in order to get the respect in the first place. But there's a lot of other things. Being authentic, being humble, being true to yourself, being courageous. There's a whole bunch of things that are important in order to get people's respect, clearly. And remember, you're in the business of being respected, not liked. And this is an important distinction, particularly for those who may well have been a member of the team that you now lead, and all of a sudden you've been pushed into the position of coordinator or manager or director or whatever position you're put in. All of a sudden you've now got to take a different stance. Doesn't mean become aloof. It just means to understand that no longer is it about liking, it's about respect. And that's a critically important aspect of leadership. And I guess when it comes down to it, here's another important insight, that you could have exactly the same thing said to 2 different people, with two completely different effects. So there's two to tango here. If you're obviously giving people feedback, the onus of responsibility as well is on them, whoever they are, to be able to receive the feedback in the light to which it's given. But the truth of the matter is that you can give good feedback to one and they will appreciate it, and another one they just won't get it. That's not to suggest that you should stop doing it. It may well be because they are not used to receiving feedback from you or from anybody else that might have been your predecessor. So, it's important to understand that it doesn't always have the desired effect, but you've still got that responsibility to do it, which is really important. So guys, questions and comments, just type them in when you think of them, and I will certainly address them as we go. I find after a couple of sessions we have a bit of rapport with everybody, and they sort of see that I'm quite open to receiving this sort of feedback and questions. So just be bold, type in your question, make your observation, give me a comment about someone you're dealing with, and I'll treat it confidentially, but I'll deal with it nevertheless. All right, now here's something about performance reviews. I've written a book. I've written several books actually, but I've written a book called The End of the Performance Review, so you can probably get a pretty quick idea as to what I think about performance reviews. But nevertheless, it's not likely that performance reviews are going to go away in local government. And many of you might think they've got a good place, but here's some interesting statistics on performance reviews, which in some cases is the only feedback that people actually get all year. So 30% of performance reviews end up actually decreasing employee performance. There's no research that I've seen anywhere in the world that demonstrates that performance review actually positively impacts on employee performance. So I guess we've got to ask the question, why do we do it? 58% of executives believe their current program doesn't result in performance or engagement. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction right across all industries, all across the world, around the whole notion of the systems that we have in place. So that becomes a bit of a worry, a bit of an issue. 2/3 of employees with highest performance scores aren't actually the highest performers. So in other words, there's been a lot of commentary about this, that we're giving people ratings around this, and what happens is that we tend, if we've got a 5-point scale, to give people a sort of a 3 when they really should be a 2, or we might give people a 4 when they should be a 2, or whatever. So and we sort of say it's very objective, but it's not necessarily. It's much better to actually give people the literal feedback rather than give them a number, because people will interpret the number in different ways. Hello, Aaron. If I could give a prize, you'd get it because you're the first one that's making a comment. Aaron says, hi, what are your thoughts about face-to-face versus written feedback, such as via email? Great question. Face-to-face, no substitute. There is absolutely no substitute. If you want to be effective and influential, face-to-face is the way to go. Emails are very poor at giving feedback. It doesn't really work. It's 1 of 200 emails that we get a day. They're probably not going to take much notice of it. It's much better to do it face-to-face. The second best way is over the telephone, and then you can use some of the other medium that you're talking about there. So always face-to-face. So your homework is to give 3 bits of feedback every day face-to-face, not via email, because it doesn't work. And I'm sure that won't surprise you. I'm sure you're aware of that. Okay, 6% of companies surveyed think performance reviews are worth the time. Are worth the time. So in other words, 94% of people think they're a waste of time. All right, now, as you're aware, a lot of organisations are going down the road of getting rid of performance reviews. As I said, I can't see local government doing this. So really what I'm proposing is that we give regular, consistent and persistent feedback moment by moment, situation by situation, project by project, and we do it regularly. And if you do that, then the performance review will be a simple breeze. 2% of HR executives say that yearly evaluations are useful. Wow, that means what? 98% of people, these are the people that actually administer them, think they're a waste of time, but yet they administer them. So you can see we've got a real issue here. 80% of workers are dissatisfied with the performance reviews. Okay, so a lot of 80% of people think it's a whole waste of time. 3 to 5% improvement in performance as managers believe will be generated in the process. So look, there's some sobering results there, and it probably indicates that we need to be doing more than giving people a performance review. We need to be engaging people in regular, consistent conversations over periods of time. They don't have to be long, but they need to happen. And if you do that, if you do nothing else out of this program but just do that, you'll get much, much better results. And guess what? You'll feel heaps better about yourself because you're actually doing the important thing by yourself. Okay. Now, let's talk about managing expectations. It's a very complex subject, managing expectations. A lot of people think it's pretty simple. It's actually not really that simple. There's a whole bunch of questions that we go through in order to get people to the stage where their expectations are in sync with the people that they lead. So let's have a look at the key questions. The most fundamental question in this is, what are my expectations as a leader? So what are your expectations as a leader? Now you might think that's a pretty weird question. I already know the answer to that. Well, that's good, but you need to think through very carefully. The very first thing you need to think about is, where is the line? Where is the line in the sand? Have you worked out what that is? What's acceptable and what's unacceptable? Do you know where that line is? That's the very first question. So we need to be able to determine what that is. Once we've determined that, the next question that I've got for you is, have you communicated those expectations to your team? All right, so it's one thing knowing it, but it's another thing communicating it. And I find that often it's the second of these two that's the problem, that the manager themselves knows, or the leader knows what their expectations are, but they haven't really yet communicated it on the basis that they assume that other people understand where the line in the sand is. Dangerous, and it won't work. Once you have, excuse me, once you've worked out what your expectations are, and once you've communicated those, the next step is, does the receiver, that is, the team member, do they actually understand your expectations? And again, you can assume that they do, but they may not. So you need to make sure that they actually understand what those expectations are. All right, now don't walk away giving people expectations, communicating them, and just assume that they actually understand it. And I think we'll, those of us that have been around a little bit as leaders would understand that that's a very easy trap to fall into, that people actually don't always understand your expectations. Now, it's one thing understanding an expectation, it's another thing to actually accept the expectation. All right? So do I know what my expectations are? Have I communicated my expectations? Do people understand what my expectations are, and then do they accept my expectations? In other words, if they think your expectations are silly, unrealistic, or whatever they might think, they might necessarily tell you that, but if they don't accept them, then clearly they're not going to meet them, are they? Because they don't think they're a sensible expectation. So we need to check to make sure that people not only understand what the expectations are, but are also willing to accept the expectations. Now, if people aren't willing to accept the expectations, then you have to have a conversation about that to find out why that's the case. All right, so don't be afraid to have that conversation and open up that particular dialogue with somebody else. The next question you've got to ask is, sorry, there's a typo there. Are my team members permitted to meet those expectations? So it's all very well saying that we want deadlines by Friday at 3 o'clock, but the fact of the matter is the people that you're relying on in your organisation aren't getting you the information you need to put together the report until 2:15. Well, obviously you're not in a position where you can meet those expectations because you're not permitted to do that. So a good leader will actually attempt to create an environment where people can consistently meet expectations. So if there are roadblocks there, your job is to try to do whatever you can to get rid of those roadblocks. And if you can't get rid of those roadblocks, then you probably need to change the expectations so that they are in fact acceptable to the person in the position that has to meet those expectations. Then it's about, do my team members know how they're performing against those expectations? So have you actually given regular feedback to people about whether they have actually met those expectations? Again, that's not done very well, particularly in the Australian culture. We don't do it very well at all. So you need to be, now how do you do that? Well, it's really as simple as finding critical incidents. So if there's a report that's inaccurate, or if there's a meeting where somebody perhaps hasn't made a good contribution, or if if somebody has got their priorities wrong, whatever it might be, your job is to use those critical incidents as an opportunity to give feedback on performance. So that means you've got to keep your eyes and ears open for those opportunities where you can sit down with the person, explain to them where again, reiterate where your expectations are and ask them where they think their achievement fell short, if indeed it did, or exceeded even, and then work with them on that. So the next step is, are you supporting your team members to meet those expectations? Are you giving them coaching? Most of you in this broadcast have good, solid technical knowledge. So if you've got good, solid technical knowledge, you've got a great wealth of experience to be sharing with your team members so that you can help them to achieve those expectations. What that means, of course, is giving people coaching, giving people encouragement, and certainly sponsoring their learning and development opportunities wherever they might arise. Okay, so supporting people is critical. So I'll just go back one step. So you can see that managing expectations is quite complex. And what that means is that all of those questions should be answered in the affirmative. If all of those questions are answered in the affirmative, then you're probably managing expectations very well. Okay, so you need to think carefully, where could I be doing more, and how could I be doing more, and with whom could I be doing more? And if you think about that carefully, you will probably be in a better position, because every single person on this planet needs to know where the line in the sand is, which is what your expectations are. And they need to know it, and they need to accept it. They need to be permitted to achieving it. They need to know whether they're achieving it, and they need to be supported in the achievement of it. So that's your job. So it's really important to think through about that. So what I want to do now, folks, is start to concentrate on some of the key elements of giving feedback that would be important in any situation where you have to give positive or negative feedback. So, and these aren't necessarily in any order, but I can assure you they're all important when it comes to giving feedback. So think about this. One of the key elements of giving positive or negative feedback is timing. Timing is everything, as the cliche goes. So the very best time to give somebody positive or negative feedback is when? Well, it's straight after the event, straight after the critical incident, straight after the project, straight after the interaction with a member of the public. That's the time to give feedback. Why? Well, by doing it immediately after the event, you're doing a couple of key things. One is it's fresh in people's mind. Two, you are letting the other person know that it's clearly a priority, because if it wasn't a priority, you wouldn't be addressing it right there and then. Three, interestingly enough, they're more likely to value the feedback if it's immediately after a certain type of behaviour. Okay? Just think about it this way. Imagine if you said to somebody during the performance review, I didn't get a chance to mention this to you 6 months ago when you gave that presentation to council, but I just wanted to let you know that I thought it was great. Now, that's better than nothing, but what's the presenter thinking? What's the person who has received the feedback thinking? Well, they're thinking, you know what, if it was that important and he or she thought it was that good, he or she would have given me that feedback straight after my presentation to council, you see. So its impact is limited. And of course the same is true if you gave negative feedback. If you said to someone, look, I didn't get a chance to mention this, but 4 weeks ago I just wanted to comment about that interaction you had with a member of the public over the phone. And again, what the other person's thinking is it couldn't have been all that daunting, it couldn't have been all that concerning for my boss, because if he or she had really thought that, they would have done that right at the time. You see, it's really important that you consider that. Now, I know that before I can preempt a question that might come through shortly, I know that it's not always possible to give people feedback straight after a critical incident. You're in the middle of something else, or there's all sorts of possible reasons for not being able to give that. I guess that's just the reality, isn't it? But what it means is that the moment you can draw breath, the moment you can get your head above water, you give that person that feedback. So the sooner, the better. The sooner, the more likely it is to stick. The sooner, the more effective it's going to be. So timing is everything, as I mentioned, and it's critically important when we're giving people feedback. Okay, so keep those comments and questions rolling in, folks. Now, that's come up on your slide. Great. Feedback must be specific. What do I mean by that? Well, specific feedback means that you don't just generalize about something. So, for example, if you said to somebody, I'm very concerned about your poor attitude to your work. Well, you might well think that they have poor attitude to work, but of course all that's going to do is get them very upset very quickly, and probably what they're going to do is say to you, what do you mean? And now they're forcing you to be a little bit more specific. Wouldn't it be better to say something like, I have observed in the last 4 staff meetings that when somebody else has raised an idea, you have shot it down before giving them a chance to complete what they're saying, right? So in other words, I'm using that as the basis, not you have a poor attitude, because that's a generalization and it's something that people will struggle with. And it's the same with positive feedback. It's no good saying to someone, oh, that presentation was great. Well, why was it great? What did you actually like about that presentation? and that's the specifics of it. So it's very important to think carefully how you're going to give the feedback so that it's in very small, bite-sized pieces that people can latch on to. Let me talk about a couple of examples that might make a lot of difference for you so you can sort of get my drift here. This will come up on your screen. There we go. There we are. No, disappeared again. There it is. Okay. So make your feedback specific. So if you said to somebody, overall, good job on the presentation at this morning's meeting, but it could have been better. All right, so at least you've given them feedback. But really, it doesn't tell us much, does it? I mean, the person that you receive, who would be on the receiving end of that feedback, would say, well, why was it a good job? And I wonder what could be done better. And if you didn't feel too confident about that and you're on the receiving end, you may not ask those questions. Some people will, of course. But the bottom line is it's too vague. Plus, just because you didn't like it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Okay? So what could have been done better? That's the question. So let's look at this a little bit differently. How about we say something like this? Great job on the presentation. I really liked how you used statistics to back up your key points. You see, I'm being very specific. One small comment, maybe for next time, it would be to invite more comments from the group and try and get them more engaged. You see, now I've got something to work with. So I've given both positive and negative feedback. I've done it in the one sitting, and I've been helpful to the other person, potentially, for them to take away and say, well, maybe I should use statistics regularly when I'm, I should use facts when I'm making a case. And yes, I probably should be a little bit more engaging and not just have a one-way monologue, but to create a two-way dialogue with the people in the team meeting. All right, so I hope that's clear. And as I say, keep the questions coming. So feedback needs to be timed as soon as possible after the event, and it needs to be very specific. So in your head, think about what it is that you like or dislike in that particular interaction or behaviour before you open your mouth, and then of course go for your life, and you'll find that it'll work really well. Okay, now moving on to a third dimension that's critically important in any form of feedback is frequency. Frequency does not mean once a year, right? Once a year is hopelessly inadequate. In fact, in lots of cases, I think managers will often, or any leader, will often save up all their feedback for performance review time and then just let them have it, which of course doesn't work very well. So you should be giving frequent feedback. That is, every day, every week, every month, every project, every critical incident, feedback, 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 feedback. So it needs to happen moment by moment, case by case, situation by situation. It just has to happen, because if you don't do it, then how in heaven's name will they be able to answer all of the questions that I posed earlier on about you managing their expectations? So make sure you give people plenty of feedback, and I'm going to challenge you to give 3 bits of feedback every day from now on for a week. In fact, from now on forever. But I want you to do it for a week, and I want you to tell me how that felt. What actually happened as a result of that. So I want you to do a little experiment if you don't normally do this, and tell me how that actually worked for you. So feedback is ongoing, it's never ending, it doesn't stop. Another important aspect of feedback is this. Feedback is not about you sitting down and giving them a lecture. right? It's really important that you engage the other person in the feedback. So how do you do that? Well, the best way to do that is to ask lots of questions, and the questions that you ask are open-ended questions. Why, what, where, who, how, and which. If you ask questions like that, you will get more than a one-word answer, or yes and no particularly. So why did you say that? When did it happen? Who was involved? And so forth and so on. Now, what's interesting about this is that you have, and I guess me too, we are all reasonably good technically, right? And what that means is that we have actually been trained by learning a trade or a university degree, whatever learning we have embarked upon, we have learnt to answer questions. In other words, anyone that has any technical knowledge, no matter who they are, has actually been trained to answer questions. In other words, to solve problems. Now, all of a sudden, we're saying you need, as a leader, to start asking more questions. So you need to practice asking more questions. And I know some people feel embarrassed about this because they feel that they're being intrusive, or the other person will think, you know, they're being a detective or something. But here's a good question to ask people. So somebody's come to you and there's a complex situation that's arisen. What about if you said to them, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions so that I get to understand what's going on? Now that's a question, and what that was likely to precipitate is a yes or no, or at least a grunt. You're likely to get people to agree that it's okay. You've asked permission to ask a lot of questions, and then go to town, ask all the questions that you wish to ask, and you'll find that that's a far better way to go. Privacy. I think there's a real need to praise in private and criticise in private. I am not of the school of thought that believes praise in public and criticise in private. Some of your people are quite introverted. They don't actually like attention being drawn to them, and so don't take the risk, and don't do it in a team meeting necessarily. Just pull them aside and say thank you. You did a great job on that, and I really appreciate the effort that you put in under a fair bit of pressure. All right? You don't have to do that in front of everybody, and besides, by doing it in private, it's much more personal. Okay? So, you know, there'll be different schools of thought on that, but my view is that when in doubt, give feedback in private, which basically means if you're working in an open office environment, you're going to have to pick your opportunity when you can give this feedback. If you've got the luxury of an office, then obviously you can do that behind closed doors, but if you haven't, you'll have to find a meeting room or go outside or do something away from other people so that you can actually acknowledge the good work that they've done, or in fact whatever they've done. So that's my view about privacy, but I understand that people have this view about, you know, making a song and a dance about people's performance in public, but you've got to understand that not everyone likes that. And I mean, you're not doing it to make people embarrassed. So you might as well do it in private. And if they get embarrassed in private, you can imagine that they'll probably get embarrassed even more so in public. Okay. Use critical incidents, as I've said. It's really important that you find examples and critical cases where you can actually draw attention to behaviour that is either below the expectations of your expectations, or above the expectations. And when you find those incidents, you use them as the catalyst to give feedback. All right? So you know, unfortunately what that means is that you can't really plan when you're going to be giving feedback, because you don't really know, of course, what the future holds. So you just have to wait and see. So critical incidents is the way to go. Now, what's very important in the feedback loop is to actually focus on the future. The whole purpose of giving feedback is not to point the finger of blame, and I know in local government we have a bit of a culture, don't we, around finger pointing and sort of covering our backside and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, the only reason that you're giving someone feedback is so that you can remedy the behaviour in the future if it's poor, or to consolidate the behaviour in the future if it's good. That's the only reason we're doing it. We're not doing it for any other reason. So the focus is on the future. So if someone wants to rave on about all sorts of, scenarios and situations, and this person didn't give me that, just say, stop there. All I'm interested in is the future. All I'm trying to do here is to make sure that A, this doesn't happen in the future, or possibly B, that it does continue to happen in the future. Okay? So it's a focus on the future. So don't even go talking about ancient history and all sorts of things that, unless of course they're giving you feedback around things that are roadblocks that are genuine for you to be able to rectify, by all means negotiate with them and say, well look, I'll rectify those things, but I need your commitment that you will meet this expectation in the next time this sort of situation occurs. So what I want to do now is just finish up with a couple of guidelines on poor performance, because obviously they're the most difficult bits of feedback, where you've got to sit someone down and give them some negative feedback. No one, a lot of people find this very difficult, but and what happens is they leave it and they don't do it, and then what happens is it gets worse and worse and worse, and then it becomes a performance management issue, which of course makes the whole thing very difficult. So nip it in the bud. Talk to people about poor performance. So what are some key things that you need to do? Well, when you pull someone aside, get straight to the point. No chit-chat. Don't talk to them about their family. Don't talk to them about how they're going in their work. They're sitting there or standing there, depending on where it is, wondering what this is all about. Why have you called them away from their workstation? Why have you called them away from their group? And just get to the point, because this is not about making people feel necessarily happy. This is about being professional. Secondly, very important for you to explain early the purpose of the meeting. So I might say, look, the purpose of the meeting, as far as I'm concerned, is the way you interacted with Mary in that meeting. Okay? So I just say something like that. Now you might say, well, that's not very specific. Well, I just want to tell them what the purpose of the meeting is. I'll get down to specifics very shortly. Next, or the next key point, is you have to encourage the other person to talk. So I might start by saying, look, in particular, I wanted to talk about the fact that you cut Mary off 3 times, and we have a value about respect in this organisation, and I'm concerned that what you did wasn't consistent with the value of respect. Okay, that's been my feedback. Now, I will then stop and say, what do you think about that? So what I'm trying to do is effectively get the other person to talk, and by doing that, one, this gets me off the hook because I can take a breath and think about what to say next, but more importantly, I'm showing courtesy to the other individual to give them the opportunity to be able to respond to my criticism, and it is criticism because this is about poor performance. So just try to encourage them to talk. Now, if they say things that are completely and utterly inaccurate, or they're being provocative, or they're pressing your buttons, please don't have your buttons pressed, or don't respond, which is the next key point. Bite your tongue until it bleeds, and please don't interrupt them. So just store it in your memory bank, and then the moment they draw breath after they've, responded to your criticism, then you can correct them. So you can say, look, there's a couple of things that you said there that were inaccurate, or there are a couple of things that you said there that I disagreed with, and these are what they are. You know, tell them what they are. Now, if they interrupt you while you're doing that, you can say, stop, I've given you a chance, I've given you the opportunity without interrupting you, and I'd really appreciate the same courtesy. And you can't do that, of course, if you've been interrupting them all the time. So it gives you that moral high ground, it shows courtesy, it shows respect, and you can then continue with your comment. Some other key things that are important when you're dealing with poor performance is please don't get into an argument. Dealing with poor performance is not about an opportunity for an argument, although having said that, the other person may well think that it is an argument. It's not an argument. And in fact, I would actually say to the other person, I refuse to argue with you about this. In other words, I'm not just going to get into the boxing ring with you about this. Or you could say, let's just agree to disagree, all right? Because it's not supposed to be an argument. It's about you giving feedback about poor performance. So keep those questions rolling in, folks. Another key point around this is focus on performance. So don't start talking about them personally. Talk about the behaviour. That's why critical incidents are so powerful, because you're referring to a particular behaviour that's occurred, right? Because if you, as I said earlier on, if you said to someone you've got a poor attitude, or if you said the last 4 times someone said something in a meeting, you actually cut them off, it's much better to do the latter than the former, and it's really focusing on performance, whereas by saying you have a poor attitude, it's quite personal. So get that clear before you give the feedback. Again, like I said earlier, focus on the future, and it's all about what will happen as a result of this feedback. So one of the key questions that you could ask people at the end of giving a feedback on poor performance is simply to say to that person, can I get your commitment that you'll meet this expectation next time? You don't use those exact words, but what you're doing is you're trying to get a nod or a grunt or a yes from the other person that yes, they will meet the expectations. And of course, if you don't get it, then that's another conversation around why they can't commit to meeting those expectations in the future. And if you do get it, you can then hold them accountable for that, which is really important. In other words, if it does go wrong in the future, and interesting enough, it's less likely to, then you can quite clearly say to the person, you made a commitment, and they did. Emphasize strengths as well as weaknesses. Really important, guys, to make sure that, look, the worst thing you can, the least you can do when you're giving poor performance is to say to the other person, I'm sure you can do this. I feel really confident you can, because if you didn't think they could do it, why are you bothering to give them feedback? So that's a positive, isn't it? So look for things that are positive as well as negative. That becomes very, very important. Okay. And finally, seek out the causes. And what I mean by that is that don't just accept on face value what people tell you. Ask lots of questions. Say, tell me about that. Why did that happen? Who was involved? When did you speak to that person? How did it take place? Because normally what happens is that what people tell you is only the tip of the iceberg. And if you delve a little bit deeper, you can get to the real crux of the problem. And until you know what the cause is, you can't really remedy the situation. All right? So ask questions. And as I said before, say to people, you mind if I ask you a couple of questions so I understand this a little bit clearer? All right. Okay, so that brings us pretty much to the end. We've got time for 1 or 2 questions if you want to type them in. I'm more than happy to accept those at this stage, and I can see what I can do to give you some good feedback on your questions. But while you're thinking about that, I'd like you to think about this. I'd like you to make a commitment. This is your homework. I'd like you to make a commitment to give feedback 3 times a day for the next week. All right. Now that's not onerous. That could be just saying thank you to someone. It could be about pointing out to someone that they haven't completely followed the process that's really critically important in the local government environment they're working in. I just want you to give feedback 3 times a day for the next week, which basically means that I'm setting you a task of 15 bits of feedback, 15 bits of feedback a week, which isn't a big ask. You will be pleasantly surprised at the results. You'll be very happy with the results, and you will find that it will get you started on this habit of giving regular feedback at every opportunity. It's not difficult. You can do it. If you're really worried about negative feedback, then give 3 positive bits of feedback each day. I don't care what it is. Just get used to doing it. And you might say to me, oh, I'm already doing that. Well, then maybe you should make it 6. In other words, you can never give people too much feedback. So you might want to think about what other feedback can I give? What else could I do? So that's your homework. And the other bit of homework that I'm going to give you is to complete the influencing capabilities diagnostic, which you'll complete, before we meet again in a fortnight. So those are the 2 bits of homework. So guys, any last comments, questions, clarification? Now's your chance before we sign off. No, doesn't look like it. I know you're still there because I can see you are. Guy, I can't, not literally, but I know you're there. Whether you're listening or not might be another thing. But guys, thank you. I've enjoyed starting off our program on feedback. I hope you found at least one little gem out of this. And I hope that what it means is that you can go away and apply something, because that's the critically important thing. These 6 sessions are important, but it's what you do between the sessions that's critically important. And can I also suggest that you make a commitment that every single time we have one of these, that it becomes a priority. If someone says to you, oh, I'm trying to organise a meeting, you say, no, I've got my lunch and learn program on at that time. And just make it a commitment, just like you had to go to a workshop, no different. So if you do that, that would be great. The other thing I'd say to you before we finish up is that you have to register for each particular unit. Now, I made a mistake in the last mail out that I think when people were trying to enroll in Unit 4, they enrolled in Unit 5. So I'll rectify that. And when I send out the email to you, keep your eyes peeled for it. I'd like you to go through and just simply put your email address in and your name so that you're enrolled for all 6 immediately, so they're in the diary. And why is that important? Because you'll get reminders and things coming through on a regular basis, and that way you're less likely to miss what will be a good opportunity for your growth and learning. All right, I've got a bit of feedback here from, thank you, Tim. I will take away some great tips today. Thank you, Renee. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. And I'm glad you were able to enroll at the last minute. I apologise if there was a bit of a mix-up there, but you're on board now, and that's great. So just make sure I'll rectify the list and make sure that you're on the list for future broadcasts. So thanks, folks. We'll finish there.